Hello, I'm Max Montowski, and I've identified some serious cyber threats to cloud services. To give you a brief rundown of what we found and what's been happening, we first detected that there's been uh, copious amounts of suspicious activity emanating from a specific IP address, shown here. We then began to analyze our logs, and we realized that there's been quite a few breaches. First, we identified some reconnaissance, and then we identified some brute force attacks. So the attacker was attempting to log into several hundred different user accounts, and then he also tried many different passwords for each account. In the end, he was able to successfully log into several accounts, and he ran over 1,000 automated commands. And so we know for certain that the system has been breached. To give you a basic timeline, this all started at 1:50 in the afternoon. It began with network scanning, which lasted about an hour and a half, and then brute force attempts began at about 2:30, and those went for about an hour. And then once the attacker had successfully logged in, he then proceeded to log into 13 more accounts, which was over the course of about another hour. And then after that, there was about an hour of silence, and then 4 hours of 4 to 5 hours of automated commands with 10 to 20 sometimes being run in a single second. So we've got a clear attack flow. The attacker is obviously experienced. He began with reconnaissance, then he brute forced his way in, and then once he had access, he began to exploit our system. So some evidence of the compromise, we have a high number of failed logins, followed immediately by successful logins, all from the same IP address. We also had network scanning detected, and we also had an extremely rapid execution of commands, and many uh, files were copied, moved, or removed, which shows that information was being um, manipulated. So there's some basic impact. There's been unauthorized access to accounts, which means there's the potential for admins to be compromised. We know at least one of the admins was compromised. There's the risk of data being lost or stolen. And then we also know that our system's integrity has been compromised. These are some pretty big things. There's going to be possible compliance and reputation damage. We could lose some of our data. We could lose our customers. We could even be held ransom if some of the data that was stolen was private user data that is highly confidential. So this could have some serious ramifications for the company as a whole. So first, some critical recommendations. We need to block the hacker's IP address first. But that isn't enough. There's nothing to stop them from using a different or IP address, using a VPN, those sort of things. Um, to terminate his access to our system, we need disable all compromised accounts, enable multi-factor authentication, especially for administration accounts and those that have been compromised. So probably something as simple as setting up our accounts. You need to have your phone. We'll send you a text message with the code to access your account just to make sure that it is actually you. Then we need to also restore backup. This may be somewhat complicated because there has been a couple days of new data being entered into our system, so we'll need to make sure that we add that to our backup. But we need to make sure we restore our backup because the hacker may have left some malicious malware which could compromise our system again. We also need to identify the affected data to see what actions we need to take, whether notifying customers, um, local law enforcement, national law enforcement, or so on. A little bit longer term, we need to enforce account lockout, so we can't have people entering hundreds of passwords at a time. That's a serious flaw for our system because it allows a hacker to brute force his way into accounts. We also need to limit login attempts from a specific IP address. We also need to restrict IP addresses in general so that only verified employee IP addresses are used. We do not want outside IP addresses to be used. Should an employee get a new IP address or and a verification be traveling and need to do work, we can deal with that on a one-to-one basis. We can update IP addresses. We can give them temporary uh, passes. We also need to strengthen the password requirements so that way it's harder for someone to brute force their way in. We also need to apply better principles of least privilege so that if attacker does breach a user's account, they cannot access so much data. We also need to improve monitoring so that attackers um, do not go unfound for this long again. And the long term, we need a enhanced threat detection. We need to be getting more notifications when attacks like this are happening. We need to have a team ready to go to stop it before it gets this far. We also need to have more regular security audits just to make sure our system's up to date and secure. We also need to train our employees better. We need to make sure that they're aware of phishing attacks, of good password hygiene. Just make sure that they are also doing their part to help keep the system secure. And as I said, we need to improve incident response. We need to have our security team ready to go to deal with this. We need to have a protocol set up if data is lost. We need to have more backups. Everything needs to be a smoother operation because the longer we are out of operation because of attack like this, the more revenue we lose. We also just need to have better continuous monitoring. We should always have a security personnel on hand. It may cost a fair bit more to have that another employee, but in the grand scheme of things, when this could cost the business a magnitude more to lose this data and suffer the legal and reputational consequences, having one or two more employees that are always on duty is going to be a far safer and a far smarter thing to do economically.